This is it, the situation. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air. Born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad. I permit to speak at every hazard. Nature without check, with original energy. Hello and welcome to 5 Up on Walt, part of Whitman at 200, Art and Democracy, a region-wide initiative organized by the University of Pennsylvania Libraries with major support from the Pew Center for the Arts and Heritage to mark the 200th anniversary of Whitman's birth. Whitman was actually born on May 31st, 1819, so there's going to be no cake tonight. But he lived the last 2 decades of his life in Camden, right across that way. There we go. I knew Ron was going to correct me. I was counting on you. Which is why we here at Penn are hopping on this party train, and of course to recognize his connection to the region and his far-reaching relevance today. So tonight, we'll be hearing from 5 members of the Writers' House community, each of whom has something to say about Whitman's legacy as a poet and as a person. Whitman's a complicated figure. Not going to pretend that he's not. And the poets and writers represented here have been invited to engage with Whitman's legacy in the way that feels most right to them. So my name is Anna. I'm an instructor here, and I work on various Writers' House projects, very luckily. So excited to be here hosting this event. And I'm first going to introduce our very first speaker, who is the inimitable Davy Niddle. Yeah. Clap for you twice. Davy Niddle is a 4th-year doctoral candidate in English who works in the fields of feminist, queer, and trans theory, urban studies, and experimental American writing. Good God, how do you do it all? His dissertation is entitled Queer with the City, Deviance and the Politics of Urban Change, and uses experimental work by queer and trans authors to read the history of revitalization and redevelopment in major American cities after urban renewal as co-constitutive of queer and trans conceptions of selfhood and space. Amazing. He is the author of the chapbooks Empathy for Cars, Force of July, from Horseless Press in 2016, and Cyclorama from the Operating System in 2015. Recent writing has appeared or is forthcoming in The Recluse, A Modern, Fence, and The Brooklyn Rail. He's also completely brilliant and my friend, and I'm exceedingly pleased he's here with us tonight. Please welcome Davy Niddle.
Thank you, Anna, for that introduction. Thank you all for being in this room. Thank you, Writers' House family who is watching this in some other place. Hi. There are lots of you. Oh, goodness. You're never too old. Hello to the Modpo people. Hello, Al. It's such a pleasure to get to think critically and carefully with all of you and with Ron and with Frank and with Ujwala and with Simone about what to do with Whitman at 200. Fertile Edge, after Canto 6. Canto 6 of Song of Myself begins. A child said, "What is the grass?" fetching it to me with full hands. How could I answer the child? I do not know what it is any more than he. I guess it must be the flag of my disposition, out of hopeful green stuff woven. Canto 6 goes on to give a number of definitions for the grass. The handkerchief of the Lord, the produced babe of the vegetation, a uniform hieroglyphic, the beautiful uncut hair of graves. The Oxford English Dictionary definition of grass is in the loose process of being updated. The last complete definition is from 1989. The first definition in the OED describes grass as, quote, herbage in general, the blades or leaves and stalks of which are eaten by horses, cattle, sheep, etc. A decade ago, the EPA citing cow farts as the origin of 1/3 of US methane emissions, argued for the necessity of, this is actually what it's called, low gas grass. With reduced fiber, livestock that eat grass in the present is a mark of cows taking up room and therefore a luxury item. Consider the cachet of grass-fed beef. The flag of Whitman's disposition is being curious. What is the grass is a kind of ecological wherefore art thou, Romeo, in that it asks his once, how did these blades of green stuff get here? And what kind of symbolic work is made of this plant and its appearance? Why does grass exist? What do we do with the grass now that it's here? It's a set of questions poems are good at. How do I describe these things I see, and how am I supposed to feel about them? How and why and to what extent do I say how I feel, if I know? The Texas Forest Service is currently combating a grass fire that's been burning since Sunday outside Amarillo. Nearly 95% of wildfires are started by people. Last week, on January 28th, 4 kids ignited a grass fire in Colorado Springs by setting off fireworks in the street. A later subdefinition of grass in the OED reads, in agricultural use, any of the species of plants grown for pasture or for conversion into hay. And a still later one, pasture, the condition of an animal at pasture. A pasture is a lot of grass together. A lot of grass together near a building or house without livestock is a lawn. A lawn in a drought's a liability. In 2015, the city of Paso Robles, California, banned grass lawns altogether, citing water use restrictions. People have been planting other things. For all of its indexing of material life, Leaves of Grass is a work of not knowing, of having fun with the refusal to know, of taking pleasure in conjecture. Whitman, as Anna mentioned, will be 200 in May, so it's possible that you'll spend some time in class or at lectures or at readings this year debating the merits of that, of him, of a racist, misogynist writer interested in being the poet for all of America and really being that for some folks and completely glossing over others in his excitement about grouping them into the multitudes of which he is composed. It's possible that this is what you've been doing in class and at lectures and at readings in 2019 already. The U.S. Forest Service reports that there are over 9,000 varieties of grass, 35 of which are cereals, including corn, wheat, barley, and millet. Roots of grass, rather than their leaves, are the sites of voters' activism, such as we might see in 2020, A Year About Vision. If the poems and leaves are the sort of grass that's pasture, then we're Whitman's sheep, and the grass of him is doing something to us, making us more palatable or better on the market, like a degree or a badge. Or we're cattle, and the poems say, come and eat me, in which we consume a poem by reading. Or we're out to pasture in the poems, invited to their grass to have somewhere to be. Dry grass initially fueled Camp Fire, the costliest natural disaster in 2018 and the deadliest wildfire in California's history. 86 people died in Camp Fire, and over 18,000 buildings were destroyed. People found some kittens in Camp Fire, and were reported to have named them Phoenix and Ash. In some climates, grass is seasonal. Grass figures the part of the year that's spring. Summer is the time between grass and hay. Emily Dickinson had a lot to say about the grass, but it's not her birthday. It's lots of poets' 100 birthdays this year. Robert Duncan, Louise Bennett, Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Duncan said of Whitman, we're very close in Whitman to recognizing that culture is the human condition. An analysis of cereal grasses suggests conversely that grass is the human condition. Wheat and oats, sorghum and barley. People have eaten wheat for the lion's share of human history. It probably originated somewhere around present-day Turkey. And for that same lion's share of human time, people have hung out in grasses, shared grasses with their non-human pals. One of Emily Dickinson's poems about the grass begins, a narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him. Did you not? His notice instant is. The grass divides as with a comb, a spotted shaft is seen, and then it closes at your feet and opens further on. It's in the grass that things can happen. Snakes can be there, lost keys. Last week, iRobot, the company that manufactures the Roomba, unveiled the Terra, an autonomous bladed vacuum for your lawn. It's the first robot mower that can be reliably programmed to avoid shredding your flowers, getting lodged under your car, or going for a ride around the block. It's the first to know lawns have edges. Today, February 5th, is the second day of Kansas Wildfire Awareness Week, marshaled into being by Governor Laura Kelly. It was 68 degrees here today, and lots of folks nearby were hanging around on the grass. Yesterday around noon, firefighters responded to a call in Pratt County, Kansas, about a grass fire they were able to quickly put out. The synthetic turf produced for last Sunday's Super Bowl in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta was made by a company called Greenfields USA. The company uses a synthetic material 10-cate grass. When it's installed in a field, it's a 10-cate grass system with a base layer. It's woven like the hopeful green stuff of Whitman's disposition and its flag. The English folk song in which oats, peas, beans, and barley grow predates Leaves of Grass by about 100 years. You might remember the question from the version recorded by Raffi on the Baby Beluga album in 1980. Do you or I or anyone know how oats, peas, beans, and barley grow? What is the grass is a variation on that question, a child's question about how it all works. Last summer, Scott Wagner, the then Republican candidate for governor in Pennsylvania, threatened to mow the grass himself in Malcolm X Park at 51st and Pine if the city didn't get to it fast enough. Mayor Kenney said the city would deal with it, and by Monday, it was done. Thanks.
That was so amazing. Thank you so much, Davey. So next, we're going to have, also inimitable, but in totally different ways, Ron Silliman. Ron has written and edited 40 books, most recently, If Wants to Be the Same as Is, Essential Poems of David Bromwich. I had to practice that so many times. It's great, though. Co-edited with Jack Crick and Bob Perlman from New Star Books, and has had his poetry and criticism translated into 16 languages. Silliman was a 2012 Kelly Writers House Fellow. He also happens to be a dear pal and a mentor of mine, and I'm really, really, really happy he's here. Please welcome Ron Silliman.
My lawn opens onto woods. It doesn't have an edge.
Your Roomba's screwed.
It's a Terra, not a Roomba. Somebody will eventually do one that handles texts, and it will have a great name, too. But anyway, multitudes. And this is about Walt's love of the plural. Walt Whitman often is characterized as an apotheosis of the American cult of individualism, with Song of Myself presented as Exhibit A. Stephen Mitchell, for example, writes, "Certainly the poem embodies an outrageous egotism, an I so shamelessly naked that even a bodhisattva can admire it." Not quite sure how that follows, but I hear something different. It may be because I've been teaching Gertrude Stein's Tender Buttons at the same time that I've been rereading Song in Mitchell's faux version of the 1855 first publication in Leaves of Grass. That presented the text as a single, unbroken, long poem in a truer version of the first edition and in the 1891 Deathbed edition that replicates the 1881 final variant. He didn't write it till the end of his days. He stopped 10 years early. Broken now into a suggestive 52 sections and using a title that did not settle on the text until 1876. Song was published in 6 different compositional stages during Whitman's life, with Mitchell's 1993 edition representing what he himself characterizes as a conflated version. Preparing my notes on Stein's prose poems, I'm reminded that while Whitman was dying in Camden, an event reported on by the U.S. press on a daily basis, the 17-year-old Stein was in Baltimore preparing to attend Radcliffe, and certainly was aware of America's most famous and thoroughly out gay poet. Matt Miller has written of Whitman's influence, for example, on The Making of Americans, a title that fairly screams it out, and whose scope recalls the ambition of Song, if not the whole of the Leaves of Grass. 43 years ago, G. Thomas Kuser, observed that two of our most eccentric writers and autobiographers, Walt Whitman and Gertrude Stein, seem to share many intriguing similarities. True that. But where Kuser locates these similarities in time and identity, what I hear instead is a tick in number, very nearly a drumbeat of the plural. In the original 1855 edition, it jumps right out in the 6th line. Houses and roof perfumes. The shelves are crowded with perfumes. By the deathbed version, 2 additional stanzas have been inserted into the poem, pushing this line into the 2nd section, while converting Whitman's 4-period ellipsis into a comma and trading in roof for the rhyme of rooms, a revision that spells out the primacy of sound in this text. Houses and rooms are full of perfumes. The shelves are crowded with perfumes. Rooms also has the advantage of being plural. The number of multiples in just the first few pages of the poem can be stunning. Echoes, ripples, and buzzed whispers, green leaves and dry leaves, dark-colored sea rocks, belched words, a few light kisses, a few embraces, a reaching around of arms. That is a page and a half from the Mitchell. In addition to having composed a 50-page poem that favors exposition over narrative, Whitman has written one in love with the plural. Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. I concentrate toward them that are nigh. The conversion of roof to rooms is fortuitous, as Rooms is the title of the 3rd and final section of Tender Buttons, the chapter of Stein's book that is not a series of short, witty prose poems, but very nearly an essay in Stein's unique manner on method. Buttons likewise concentrates towards them that are nigh, as the world it conveys is very much that of bourgeois women of pre-First World War Paris, poem titles filled with hats, coats, umbrellas, and a long dress, with relatively few references to men beyond soldiers and that white hunter, who I take to be Teddy Roosevelt. Plurals categorize, right where creative writing workshops argue that one should focus on the specific. In theory, the singular is concrete, the plural general. It's not an accident that we target in on the wheelbarrow, sensing a softer, almost fuzzy focus on the chickens. Yet, as that shipwreck of the singular George Oppen reminds us, at the start of being numerous, there are things we live among, and to see them is to know ourselves. That is very much what Stein is getting at with her invocation of familiars throughout Tender Buttons, and it's also what I hear throughout Song of Myself. Whitman's language in this sense is the antithesis of Pound's, whose preference is for specifics drenched in historical and sometimes mythological connotation, which was also what Williams heard in The Wasteland. And here I'm quoting Williams for a minute. Eliot returned us to the classroom just at the moment when I felt we were on a point to escape to matters much closer to the essence of a new art form itself, rooted in the locality which should give it fruit. And now I'll switch to Whitman. O stars of heaven, O suns, O grass of graves, O perpetual transfers and promotions. Lists like this from the 49th canto of the Deathbed Song lack Stein's percussive alliteration, but once stripped of the romantic O, the major difference is between Stein's invocation of an interior world, household objects, and food over Whitman's wider-ranging, often more abstract or transcendental categories. Whitman's plurals can be concrete, as with the 28 young men observed splashing in the water in the 11th section, or the, and this is his Village People moment. Blacksmiths with grimed and hairy chests, the lithe sheer of their waists plays even with their massive arms. Overhand the hammers swing, overhand so slow, overhand so sure, they do not hasten, each man hits his place. He's closer to Williams here than Stein, employing the plural to set up a close-up. Looking at the following famous stanza, you will see that even the singular nouns other than I categorize. They may be singulars, but they're plurals at heart. And I'll finish with this. Patriarchs sit at supper with sons and grandsons and great-grandsons around them. In walls of adobe, in canvas tents rest hunters and trappers after their day's sport. The city sleeps and the country sleeps. The living sleep for their time. The dead sleep for their time. The old husband sleeps by his wife, and the young husband sleeps by his wife. And these tend inward to me, and tend outward to them. And such as it is to be, of these more or less I am, and of these and all I weave the song of myself.
Thank you so much. That was so great. Next, please welcome Ujwala Maharjan. Ujwala is a spoken word poet and art educator from Kathmandu, Nepal. In 2010, she co-founded Word Warriors, a poetry group leading the Nepali spoken word movement. She was the program coordinator for Right to Speak, a spoken word poetry project that introduces the art form to youth from diverse communities, focusing on marginalized groups whose voices have been traditionally suppressed to bring out their stories. She recently graduated from the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education. That way, right? Yeah. Where she was 2017 to 2018's UNESCO Fellow at the International Education Development Program. She is currently interested in exploring art and expression-based tools to assist students' socioeconomic learning and literacy skills. Please welcome Ujwala.
Reading my East into Walt Whitman Baja. What you heard is the starting incantations of the early morning bhajans, prayers or songs sung during the winters in my toll, which is one of the oldest Newar toll or the Newar neighborhood back home in Kathmandu, Nepal. I recorded it from my bed, warm and cozy, at around 4 or 5 a.m., as the old bajas or bajays, the grandmothers and grandfathers of my toll, gathered outside in the communal resting place called Falcha, which fortunately is right next to my house. And they begin singing. This particular one was, this was one of my favorite parts growing up in the Newar toll, waking up to these sounds slowly stirring awake along with me the early morning stillness. I do not understand this song, the one that I just played. Even though I speak Newari, or Nepal Bhasa, the language of the Newar people, the ethnic group that I belong to, that particular song is sung in an archaic form of the language. There are, however, a few songs I can understand a few phrases of. And most of them that have stuck to me, or some of the songs that I have talked to with people, have been about death. Morbid, but not really. The songs were about accepting death, not as a terrible thing, but as a part of this circle of life, as an important reminder that we are here only for a short time, that you come with nothing and you leave taking nothing with you. I'm not in any means an expert on the Hindu and Buddhist philosophy on death. I will not even attest to knowing much about the Newar customs of deaths. But growing up in the Newar culture, or at least in my community, it was a beautiful mix of Hindu and Buddhist traditions and beliefs, so much so that if you asked a child what religion he belonged to, they would not be able to distinguish between the two. I didn't. A big part of this culture is to acknowledge that a big part of this culture is to acknowledge the gods or divinity or the source of life and light in everyone and everything. And that means everyone. You, me, that doesn't matter the color of our skin, doesn't matter what we like to eat for breakfast, and also in everything, meaning the metal in this mic and the electricity flowing through it. It also means acknowledging that life, this life contained within this me, does not end with this thing called death. It just continues on in some other form, or merges into the greater life, or being, or power, or universe, or however we name the absolute oneness we're all a part of. Now, where does Walt Whitman fit into the story? I was introduced to Whitman through Canto 6 of Songs of Myself from the Leaves of Grass. I will read you a part of the canto and we'll talk about Whitman a little bit more and I'll wrap it up. And now it seems to me the beautiful uncut hair of graves. Tenderly will I use you curling grass. It may be you transpire from the breasts of young men. It may be if I had known them, I would have loved them. It may be you are from the old people or from offspring taken soon out of their mother's laps. And here you are, the mother's laps. This grass is very dark to be from the white heads of the old mothers, darker than the colorless beards of old men, dark to come from under the faint red roofs of mouths. Oh, I perceive after all so many uttering tongues, and I perceive they do not come from the roofs of mouths for nothing. I wish I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women, and the hints about old men and mothers, and the offspring taken soon out of their laps. What do you think has become of the young and old men? What do you think has become of the women and children? They are alive, and well, somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death, and if ever there really was, it led forward life, and does not wait at the end to arrest it, and seized the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward. Nothing collapses, and to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. As you can guess, my reaction to this was, I think I know what you're talking about. So I thought of him as one of the Bajas, Whitman Baja, one who would have sat amongst the Bajas and Bajays of my toe, singing and celebrating himself, or the life in him and everyone, or the life in him and in everyone else. At this point in my life, when I was first introduced to him, I did not stay with him too long. I thought he was talking about things I sort of already understood from the philosophy that I grew up with. And I strayed away from him. But who can stray away from him? I must have occasionally visited him here and there, but I really came back to him to hang out with him only recently through the Motpo course. And every time I read him, his poems, his words, his styles, I could not think of the other poets that I had visited along the way. Especially so Mary Oliver, who I had followed so dearly. As the god of Google would have it, it didn't take me long to search what connection there was between the two. Oliver, in her book Upstream, refers to Whitman as a brother she never had, a friend, an uncle, and her best teacher. She had literally carried him and his words in her backpack for the large part of her life. So his words probably seeped into hers, and through hers probably seeped into mine. He had then kept his words when he wrote, "I follow you, whoever you are, from the present hour." But when I think of this he or his words that follow me, I do not only think of Whitman or Whitman's words. It also means Oliver or Oliver's words, Devkota, Rumi, Sulo, and countless other poets and their words. They follow me too. The I and me in Whitman's poems is not particularly the human frame of one poet, not just the Whitman with his white hair and beard, but the almost omnipresent and the all-encompassing I and me, which I believe is the capital P poet he refers to in his sort of problematic poem, The Passage to India, the one whose voice goes after what eyes cannot reach. The poet, the one that is the mouth of the tongue, the one that is the mouth or the tongue of the being. This I or me in his poems, admittedly, can come off as arrogant. But when he says things like, "What I assume, you shall assume." But I also read my East into his poems, and I read into him a sort of humility that you probably have come across as well. It comes from knowing that you and I are just ways we addressed each other in this world, but ultimately we're all one. Coming from that realm of the greater I, and not from the individual frame of a human being, it is an expression of humility. And what is being said and assumed is really what we all are saying. What Whitman, this white-bearded human, does contribute of his own, though, I think, is his style. His palpable mix of exuberance and bravado, his uninhibited expressions, and this is what I hope to take away from him this time. Actually, I probably already have, because it is contagious. The moment we came into contact, we were probably affected by it. As a concluding thought, it seems to me that particularly through his style, he is advocating for people like us who not just use but also work with this miracle of a thing called language. And I don't only mean the language of verbal language, but language that we use to communicate and express. He is advocating for us to become the tongue of this being, to write, to speak, to create, and bring into existence things that are beyond our physical reach, but present in abundance around us and within us. So, I invite myself and us all to do what he advocates for, to create, and humbly acknowledge that when we do, it is you talking just as much as myself. I act as the tongue of you. Tied in your mouth, in mine, it begins to be loosened. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ujjwal. That was so great. Next, we are going to have the wonderful Frank Sherlock. Frank's recent books include The City, Real and Imagined with C.A. Conrad, which is one of my all-time favorite books, and Space Between These Lines, Not Dedicated. From 2014 to 2015, he was the Poet Laureate of Philadelphia, and he's graced this particular podium right here many, many times. Please welcome Frank Sherlock.
Thanks. I have to get a tablet. It's less cumbersome. Not that any of you cared, but all right. So the way the Walt Whitman lore goes is that he changed American poetry, which I can get behind that. And there's some in this room who have the expertise on this subject to lay out directly and exactly how that happened. But I can only talk about how Whitman changed U.S. poetry for me. My relatively autodidactic introduction to poetry happened outside the Anglo-American tradition initially, and I divined my way through connection to connection, from Russian poets to Caribbean poets to Latin American poets, with no other agenda than chasing who influenced who and which book was speaking to which book. So it was that roundabout way that I realized that the inherited Anglo-American poetries didn't really do it for me. And through my imperfect exploration, what I thought is I really didn't like U.S. poetry very much at all. I was young, give me a break. My exposure was either of the Robert Frost variety or William Carlos Williams, which I embraced later when I was ready, or Ezra Pound, who I tried. I really did, but I was young and didn't like to be told what to do. And I still don't. But then I read Whitman, and in part because I'd read Lorca, which brought me back to Whitman. And in his best moments, he was exactly what I needed. I went from contemplating plums and wheelbarrows to unapologetic embrace of scents and feels and armpit smells and the kind of sexuality that was seemingly democratic. And here's one of my favorites that I love to read out loud. Canto 24, the 1892 version. Walt Whitman, a cosmos, of Manhattan, the sun. Turbulent, fleshy, sensual, eating, drinking, and breeding. No sentimentalist, no stander above men and women or apart from them. No more modest than immodest. Unscrew the locks from the doors. Unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. Whoever degrades another degrades me, and whatever is done or said returns at last to me. Through the afflatus surging and surging, through me the current and index. I speak the password primeval. I give the sign of democracy. By God, I will accept nothing which all cannot have their counterpart of on the same terms. Through me, many long, dumb voices, voices of the interminable generations of prisoners and slaves, voices of the deceased and despairing, and of thieves and dwarfs, voices of cycles of preparation and accretion, and of the threads that connect the stars, and of wombs, and of the father stuff, and of the rights of them the others are down upon, of the deformed, trivial, flat, foolish, despised, fog in the air, beetles rolling balls of dung. Through me forbidden voices, voices of sexes and lusts, voices veiled and I remove the veil, voices indecent by me clarified and transfigured. I do not press my fingers across my mouth. I keep as delicate around the bowels as around the head and heart. Copulation is no more rank to me than death is. I believe in the flesh and the appetites. Seeing, hearing, feeling are miracles, and each part, and tag me, is a miracle. Divine am I inside and out, and I make holy whatever I touch or am touched from. The scent of these armpits aroma finer than prayer. This head more than churches, Bibles, and all the creeds. If I worship one thing more than the other, it shall be the spread of my own body, or any part of it. Translucent mold of me, it shall be you. Shaded ledges and rests, it shall be you. Firm, masculine coulter, it shall be you. Whatever goes to the tilth of me, it shall be you. You, my rich blood, your milky stream pill, strippings of my life. Breast that pressed against other breasts, it shall be you. So along with these poems, I drank in the message of to Emerson that I first came across in Poetics of the New American Poetry, declaring a uniquely American form as a break from European inherited verse, not for kingly courts, but for the everyday person that Whitman aimed to champion. And it should be said that this kind of democracy here is an ambitious device that I learned only later that some of his prose writing belied. His demeaning insults and condemnations of the Irish, African Americans, and Native Americans is a point of resistance to this day from many Whitman scholars. I would like to return to Whitman similar to the way Lorca did, as an aspirational poetry in an ongoing conversation and sincere renegotiation with the complicated and sometimes contradictory prose of historical fact, which is a uniquely American situation. As Whitman goes, so might America. And I'll finish with the rest of the canto. My brain shall be your occult convolutions, root of washed sweet flag, timorous pond snipe, nest of guarded duplicate eggs, it shall be you. Mixed tussled hay of head, beard, brawn, it shall be you. Trickling sap of maple, fiber of manly wheat, it shall be you. Sun so generous, it shall be you. Vapors lighting and shading my face, it shall be you. You sweaty brooks and dews, it shall be you. Winds whose soft, tickling genitals rub against me, it shall be you. Broad, muscular fields, branches of live oak, loving lounger in the winding paths, it shall be you. Hands I have taken, face I have kissed, mortal I have ever touched, it shall be you. I dote on myself, there is that lot of me and all that is luscious. Each moment of whatever happens thrills me with joy. I cannot tell how my ankles bend, nor whence the causes of my faintest wish, nor the cause of friendship I admit, nor the cause of friendship I take again. That I walk up my stoop, I pause to consider if it really be a morning glory at my window satisfies me more than the metaphysics of books. To behold the daybreak, the little light fades the immense and diaphanous shadows. The air tastes good to my palate.
I have not read the 24th Canto in so long. That was such a wonderful returning to that particular one. Thank you so much, Frank. So finally tonight, our closer, we have Simone White. Simone is the author of Dear Angel of Death, of Being Dispersed, House of Envy of All the World, and the chapbooks Unrest and Dolly. Her work has appeared in E-Flux, Bomb, the New York Times Book Review, Harper's, and Freeze, among other places. In 2017, she received the Whiting Award for Poetry. She lives in Brooklyn and teaches in the English department here at Penn. Please welcome Simone White.
Hi. Thanks so much I'm learning that this is even better a place than I thought it was when I was far away. Kelly Writer's house is just like such a treasure, and I'm always happy to come over. So I am fundamentally just like a teacher and a writer of poetry. Like, that's what I do. And it happened that when I was thinking about what was supposed to happen on this evening, I was teaching the New American Poetry in my Poetry 88 class, which is only theoretically in competition with ModPo. So, but in the notes for Howl in the New American Poetry, Allen Ginsberg, in what was like, you forget things in books, and Allen Ginsberg in the notes for Howl in the New American Poetry refers back to Song of Myself as the primary formal generator of Howl, really. And he says in Howl, his object formally was to think about what Whitman was trying to do with the long line and to bring it, sort of update it for the formal quandaries of poetry in his moment, which at the time Howl was written as 1955 or something like that. And he's thinking about how this long line can be relevant to the learnings of William Carlos Williams' variable foot, right? The descent beckons as the descent beckoned. Memory is a kind of accomplishment, right? If you can hear that as different from English verse, then you've been reading William Carlos Williams. And also all the things that Charles Olson had been like proselytizing about in the late 40s and 50s regarding how poetry was supposed to carry the breath, right? And also, you might also want to just think about Robert Creeley's questions about content and form. But anyway, that was very much on my mind when I went searching in this text for what to say to you. And I ended up back in Canto 12 and 13, as Ron did today. And it was this thing that really made me sort of stop. This is Canto 12. I'm just going to read. These are 3 lines. These are prior to the lines about the blacksmith that Ron just referred us to. The butcher boy puts off his killing clothes or sharpens his knife at the stall in the market. That's a line. I read again. The butcher boy puts off his killing clothes or sharpens his knife at the stall in the market. It can't fit into the Norton, right? It has to get to the end of the margin in the Norton, cut back and go, indent. The next line is, I loiter, enjoying his repartee and his shuffle and breakdown. And I was like, ooh, it's so, there's something, I don't know what to say. It's a mystery, right? How those lines do what they do. And I was thinking about those lines as I started thinking about the poems that I myself have been writing, which are now a long poem, which doesn't really, I have been referring to it as or of being the other woman, which has these very, very long lines that don't fit anywhere, including on HTML screens. And it's been a constant struggle to figure out how to print these lines when people have asked me to show them the poem, because they just spread out. Now, obviously, anybody who writes American poetry is thinking about Walt Whitman, whether they're thinking about consciously or not how a long line works. And so taking up this challenge in my own work obviously did, like Allen Ginsberg, involve a reassessment of what Whitman could do for us in the current moment of writing. But I wasn't really, I wasn't like, oh yeah, we've learned this and we've learned that in William Carlos Williams and Charles Olson. I just wasn't thinking that at all. On the other hand, I was thinking about Alice Notley quite a bit, who makes many appearances in this poem as a kind of foil. And I was thinking in particular about her poem, Grave of Light. So it looks like a giant block of text. There's no punctuation in this poem. It takes about 10 minutes for Alice to read it. You can find it on Pen Sound. And one of the things that happens in Grave of Light, among the 3 or 4 pages or so of solid block text, is that there's a tiny, tiny thing that says Grave of Light that occurs in the 2nd page. That's it. Grave of Light. And I was thinking to myself, I don't understand, how is she constructing the line? How is she constructing the sentence? What is she trying to tell me when she stops? So I'm gonna read a couple of lines from Grave of Light. And maybe also, I can't do what Alice does when she performs her own work. There's a kind of breathless, lilting singing that happens, which I'm not going to be able to reproduce. But I can just enter the poem. There's actually a couple of periods in this section, so I'm going to read a couple of sentences. Enter it, and you enter thing. There is this all thing, and outside there are all the things, many of which are forbidden often, unless you have money, the concrete world's all thing, like the concrete slab of the probable grave, and that's like, period. Please see that my grave is kept clean, but why? Period. The grave of the chain of things, period. All night wander the airport world for no. And do things all day for no, did things for no. A slave shriveling the slaves partied all Grave of Light. So somewhere between Allen Ginsberg and Alice Notley, I decided that I was going to try to do a thing with a long line, and it needed to contain, right, all the things that are in the world, right, which is how we know what the long line is supposed to do in American poetry. It has to have everything in it, right? And so this poem, which actually features tons and tons of stuff about rap music, but sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not there. My friend derisively said to me about my poem the other day, oh yeah, it's like, Walt Whitman for the trap generation. So I don't think that's what it is, but I do want to read a little section so that we can think about, what we're trying to carry in what we think of as a sentence in a poem, which then becomes a line in a poem. Because I tried to explain to people that what the poem does is it doesn't distinguish in any way between verse and prose, except on occasions when I do what happens in this poem, Song of Myself, which is to indicate somehow that there's a line taking place by taking it as far out to the margin as I can, cutting back and indicating that the line continues. And I said to others as I was talking about the poem, I want these lines to have in them things that have never been written before in American poetry. That's because I am a poet and arrogant. But it's true, right? What is it supposed to carry, right? And what magical features, right, can a line like that, which is what we learn from Whitman, right? That there's magic somehow in the sentence, right? And how can that sentence be moved forward in time as American writing goes forward? All right, so I'm just going to read and I'll tell you when one of these weird lines comes up. The declarative sentence of the last generation of woman poets, now nearly overtaken by doubt about the singularity of the action female. Very young women I teach struggle with the genre of words that constitute the feminine penumbra's thought after life. Do this, do that. We do not recognize ourselves in an attitude of defiance that proffers patriarchal regard. Sometimes I feel sorry for anyone who has not reached the conclusion that solitude is too pregnant a state to be rightly associated with desire. That's a line. This is Alice. This is the beginning of a new spiritual and ethical position for a woman, based on the supposition of harmful intent, that another, male or female, even without realizing it, might very well want to hurt me, cause my subjugation. That's from her Disobedience. That these lines exist is meaningful. Notley says words I see as affecting a response in me that is assent to belief, conduction of the response, yes, all my flesh knows she is working one-on-one, level with the words to put them down as the force she feels in tension with the release of her gifts. In my reading this week, Linda Brent appeared and another Linda, the second giving advice about child support, do this, do that, but I cannot bear to be told what to do. Here's another line. I sustain a lifelong peace with my best friend who says, you do not have to be in so much pain. What other choices can you make? And I'll end there.
Wow. That was amazing. So that's the end, guys. Thank you all so much for being such an amazing, wonderful audience this evening. Thank you to all of our readers. Davy Niddle, you can do snaps again. Ron Silliman, Ujwala Maharjan, Frank Sherlock, and Simone White. Yeah. Thank you for answering my bat signal email. I existed to Frank only as like a person in his inbox until like today. So thank you so much for answering my email. And thank you also for your insight and your generosity and your just willingness to just like share something great about Whitman and about your work and all of it. Thank you to the Sussman Poetry Program for your support of this event. Thank you to the Kelly Writers House. Thank you to the tech folks. Thank you to Jessica Lowenthal and Allie Katz for answering all of my frantic emails. Email's a theme for me tonight. And also, there are refreshments in the dining room for afterwards if you are feeling peckish. Again, regrettably, no cake. I will simply close with the final stanza of Song of Myself. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere, waiting for you. Thank you.